And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television program that profiles local authors, publishers, and editors in our community. I'm Elliot Parker. It's great to have you with us. Our guest today is author and writer Andrea Fekete, and Andrea Fekete earned her MA in English from Marshall University in 2005 and got her MFA in creative writing from West Virginia Wesleyan College in 2013. She currently teaches at Ashland Community College. Her poetry has appeared in over 40 literary magazines, including the Adirondack Review, the Virginia Adversaria, the Barbaric Yawp, and the Smithville Journal, and in such anthologies as Wild Sweet Notes 2, an anthology of West Virginia poetry, the Appalachian Writers Guild Anthology, the Appalachian Heritage Anthology of Shepherd College, and Generation X. She's also the author of Waters Run Wild, a novel that we're going to talk about here as well today. So we are very pleased to have Andrea Fekete with us here on Chapters. And Andrea, good to have you with us. Thanks so much for being a part of the show.
My pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about writing and you as a writer. You're a poet and also a novelist. Mm-hmm. So how did you get into writing poetry? How did you get into writing novels? Where did that inspiration or that desire come from?
I started really early. I was probably in the fourth grade, and I noticed that when I did well on a writing assignment, I got a lot of attention from my teachers, and I enjoyed that a great deal. And I just liked making up worlds and characters and using my imagination, so started very early.
So as you found yourself getting older, did that desire increase, and did you gravitate towards poetry or novel writing first, or how did you come about being sort of a dual genre writer?
I really don't know how that happened, to be honest. Poetry was my first love, though. And I started out with it. I actually made little Hallmark cards, like I call them Hallmark cards, for other students when I was in grade school and would sell them for like 10 cents a piece. I think I got in trouble for that. I'm not sure. And then I started writing stories. I had this assignment in class in the 5th grade, and that got me into writing stories. And then in junior high, I wrote my first novel that was awful. And it just went from there.
Well, let's talk a little bit first about your novel, and we'll get an opportunity not only to see that novel, pictures of that will be put up on the screen for our viewers to see as we continue to talk today, but let's talk a little bit about Waters Run Wild and that book, and how did that book come about? When did you start writing that book? What was the inspiration for that book?
It's funny, when I went to Marshall, I was about 19 years old, and I didn't really even realize I came from a subculture of Appalachia. And then people started pointing out my accent and things of that nature. And I thought, well, you know, what is this about? And I started reading a lot of books about West Virginia, and I had Appalachian literature. I had Dr. Nancy Lang, and I loved it. And I thought, I can do this. I can write about my culture. So I started writing about coal mining and things of that nature. And I just enjoyed expressing myself that way and talking about West Virginia and how beautiful it is and how different it is, and so
let me ask you a little bit too about everything that's in this book. And you talk about West Virginia, you talk about sort of the cultural mores that define us as a people and as a region. You've got a little bit of everything in Waters Run Wild. You've got sort of rough terrain, you've got mine disasters, you've got union busting, you've got racially motivated violence, hunger and anger, deep-seated grief. I mean, there's a little bit of everything in that novel. Was that your goal when you sat down to write that, was to cover so many different aspects, those cultural mores of our culture in Appalachian, West Virginia, or is that something that just sort of happened as you were writing the stories?
It just sort of happened. I started out with one voice. I think I started out writing the father of the family that's the focus of the book. And then it just grew. I started writing about his son, who was a coal miner, and before I knew it, I was involved in all these issues, and I started to do a lot of research about coal mining and racial issues in the coal camps. And I don't know, it just kind of snowballed.
So talk to us a little bit about some of the characters that you've got featured in this book. You mentioned the father. I think we do see his voice at the beginning of the story, but we see different voices and different characters as the story unfolds. Tell us a little bit about those characters, who's in the story, who's really telling us what's happening in the book.
Each segment, I don't really call them chapters because they're so short, but each segment is narrated by a different member of the family. I have narrators as old as their grandmother, my Mama May, who's, I say she's in her early 90s, and a child around the age of 5. And then the main character is Jenny, who is the oldest daughter. She's about 18, and she appears more than anybody else in the story, and really keeps you abreast of what's happening in the book. And but there are many different narrators, so it's different, you know.
I was going to ask you, and this was just to satisfy personal curiosity, because when I read your book for the first time a couple of years ago, the first writer that popped into my mind was William Faulkner in his book As I Lay Dying, where we see this journey of a family member's death through the eyes of different characters. And of course, every character approaches the same scene and approaches the death differently. Is Faulkner and that type of a writer interest you or inspire you? Because I know you mentioned that you don't really have chapters, you called them segments, and Faulkner wrote a lot in that style. Was he someone that influenced you at all? Who influenced you when you sat down to write this book in terms of choosing that style? Was it him, maybe someone else?
It was him. As I Lay Dying, yeah. I read that in a Southern Lit class, and just loved it. I thought, oh my gosh, that has to be fun to write all those different voices, and can I do that? Am I capable of doing that? And so I sat down and tried it, and I guess it works. Now I have a published book. So.
Absolutely, no question about it. What were some of the challenges that you found, though, in writing this book? What was balancing those different narrators and those different voices difficult, or what other challenges did you come across as you were putting together Waters Run Wild?
It was difficult. For me to write in a male voice was the most difficult. I gravitate toward female heroines and just women in general. And I was told by one of my creative writing professors, Jessie Van Eerden, she's the director of the program at West Virginia Wesleyan, that I write males really strongly. And I was surprised because, you know, I really found that difficult. That was hard. And the child's voice, she was pretty hard too. You know, like 5 years old. I didn't want to make her sound too intelligent, but I didn't want her to sound, you know, too naive. I wanted her to have some element of wisdom to her, so it was hard.
What are some of the things you hope readers learn or discern after they put your book down once they've read that final page? What do you hope is the final impression they walk away from your book?
I want readers to realize how beautiful Appalachia is, and our language is, I think, musical. Our accents, our twangs. I think we just come from a gorgeous region, and not just the nature, but the people. You know, the people that populate this area are really some of the nicest people you'll meet, I think, in the whole country. That's just my opinion.
And you know, it's interesting too when we talk to writers and people that have come here for different festivals and events, that's one of the first things they always say is how nice everybody was here to them, and didn't treat them like an outsider, didn't treat them like a big city celebrity or a big town writer or whatever. You know, treated them just like they were their next door neighbor.
Yeah, people, they tend to greet you with a hug rather than a handshake. So people are different around here. There's a real sense of mutual reciprocity in the communities, and especially in coal camp life, I found in the research I did, which I live in what used to be a coal camp. I moved away. That was my parents. I did live in what used to be a coal camp and learned a lot about coal camps from my parents, but also from books, and there was definitely a strong sense of community.
Before we get to your poems and your poetry, we'll get to that a little bit later on. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the MFA. And we get a lot of questions about this. I've gotten a lot of questions about this. I have an MFA from Eastern Kentucky University. You recently got your MFA from West Virginia Wesleyan College up in Buchanan. For those folks out there that may wonder, what is that? And if there's someone out there watching our program today that is interested in writing and has heard that term, First of all, well, let's first things first. What is an MFA? Tell us a little bit about that.
MFA is a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I was in the fiction track. There was, at West Virginia Wesleyan, they offer a creative nonfiction track, poetry track, and fiction track, and have, a whole group of professors that each specialize in those areas. And I found earning that degree, really, it changed me as a person, but definitely as a writer. And if somebody's even considering, should I get an MFA? It doesn't promise you a teaching position, as no degree does, but it definitely will help you progress in ways, surprising and new and fresh ways you didn't even expect. So, I absolutely love it.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because you had already published Waters Run Wild before you got into the MFA program. Is that correct?
Yeah, Waters Run Wild was my creative thesis for my master's in English at Marshall. And I had some wonderful professors. I've been blessed with wonderful teachers in my college years. And at West Virginia Wesleyan, I forgot the question.
No problem at all. Just how did it change you?
How did it change me?
You mentioned that you really progressed as a writer. What were some of the things embedded in that degree that helped you progress and grow as a writer?
Well, I was an unconscious writer. I wrote largely unconsciously. I didn't plan anything. I completely wrote from the heart and wrote what I was, I did do research, but that's about as far as planning as I went. I mean, I didn't think, well, this character needs to have this gesture or movement because it would express this part of his personality. Or there needs to be a narrative arc, that occurs, and none of that stuff. I wasn't aware of any of it. And then I went to West Virginia Wesleyan, and they make you aware of everything that goes into writing a novel. And then before you know it, you kind of feel like you know what you're doing after you graduate. So I had some wonderful, wonderful professors up there. Dr. Irene McKinney founded the program, and now the director is Jesse Van Eerden, who is a wonderful, wonderful writer, author of Glory Bound. We have a wonderful faculty up there. It's like one big family. Everybody's so close, and the students are so supportive. It's not cutthroat or competitive like some programs are. I'm not going to mention any names. At West Virginia Wesleyan, people are really kind.
I found when I finished up my MFA at Eastern Kentucky, I missed that writing community. You talked about a family. We very much were that same way. And in fact, some of those people I was in class with are my best friends today. But I have found as a writer, I miss that. I miss that community. I miss that same group of 9 people, that cohort that I started the program with and finished the program with. I miss them. I miss their advice and their influence. And I think for me, and it sounds like you would agree, that's a huge benefit of an MFA program, if anybody's interested in going into that track, is that you do have this community of writers that you can share anything that you've written with, good, bad, or otherwise.
Or ugly.
Or ugly, absolutely. And you're going to get some good feedback from that.
Right. And, just being around the poets, and the creative nonfiction writers just inspires you, not just the other fiction writers, as I was a fiction track, but being around the other, cohorts just was so inspiring. I mean, we would sit down in the lobby and just talk, and it seemed like the more we talked, the more we all wrote, all of us. You'd go to your room and just write feverishly. It's like it's contagious or something. I don't know.
And how long did it take you to get your MFA?
It took me a little longer because I think it took me 3 years because I missed the residency because I was ill. So, yeah, it took me a little longer, but that's fine.
Sure.
I ended up doing an independent study during one semester. The semester I wasn't able to go into my 4th semester yet. And I did independent study and just grew even more. So really, it's like a blessing in disguise that I was ill and had to repeat the residency. So it was good.
So let's shift back and talk a little bit about your poetry. We mentioned that you were a dual genre author, wrote Waters Run Wild, but also an accomplished poet. What is it about poetry that you like, and how does being a fiction writer or a novel-length writer impact your poetry?
Oh, gosh. Irene McKinney said something that I still remember to this day. She said, poetry comes from the body. She said it comes up through your feet and out through your mouth, and it's very physical, and it's very, I feel like, she didn't say this part, I feel like poetry is so immersed in emotion and so immersed in confession so much more frequently than, fiction obviously is, which is somewhat confessional, but not like poetry. I guess it impacts my fiction because it makes you more aware of things like lyricism and repetition and the sound of the words, because you're obsessed with that as a poet. So it really does impact my novel writing.
Talk to us a little bit about your writing processes, and this can either be for poetry or for fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you get your inspiration? Where do you look oftentimes when you sit down and think about working on another poem or maybe outlining or starting a draft of another novel?
Mm-hmm.
Where does your inspiration often come from?
Absolutely everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Friends of mine have taught me, use everything you can use to inspire yourself. If you don't particularly feel like you can write anything that day, then look at the news headlines. Maybe go to a cafe and write down something that you heard somebody say that struck you as moving or interesting, and try to write about that. And all sorts of places. Sometimes it comes out of nowhere. So
when you begin to write something,
mm-hmm.
Do you write on pen and paper? Do you sit down at the computer? What is sort of your method for getting that first draft put together, if it's a poem
mm-hmm.
or a chapter of a novel or whatever it might be?
That's odd that you say that, because I actually do my fiction with the computer, but I write poetry with an ink pen, and I'm not sure what that means. I don't know. I'm sure it's symbolic or something, but I don't know. That's just how I've always done it. Then I edit my poetry on the computer, but there's a lot of marking out and scribbling and mess making on the page when I write a poem, and I obsess more over each and every single line when I'm working on my fiction on the computer. Jesse Van Eerden said, attend to the life in each sentence, and I try to do that.
I wanted to ask you, too, about your poetry. You've talked a lot about language when we've been talking about different aspects of novel writing and poetry writing. And one of the things that's interesting, going back to Waters Run Wild for a moment, is there's so much poetic language, I think, in your novels. I mean, that you have sentences and paragraphs that I, as a reader, could break apart and see that as a poem. Now, it may not be the perfect iambic pentameter rhyme scheme type of poem, roses are red, violets are blue kind of poem,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought the poetic language that you had in Waters Run Wild was really interesting. And then, as we've been talking over the years and become friends and gotten to know each other, when I went back and read Waters Run Wild again a few weeks ago, I thought, my goodness, I can see the poetry, I can see that poetic language in your novels. So I think it seems like when you're a dual genre writer, the genres do bleed over from time to time, even if you don't maybe consciously intend for them to.
Mm-hmm.
They do in some way.
Yeah, they feed off each other. I might take a line from a poem and actually use it in my novel. I plagiarize myself a lot. I'll say, this poem's terrible, but there's a good line in it. I'm just going to put that in my new manuscript of fiction. So I do that sometimes. And they do feed off each other quite a bit.
So tell us a little bit about what you're working on currently. We mentioned that you've got a lot of poetry published in a wide variety of literary journals. We've talked about Waters Run Wild. What are you working on now? Are you working on another novel? Are you working on some more poetry? What's going on with you right now as a writer?
I'm continually working on poetry. My first poetry chapbook came out in 2012, and I want to do a better job. I feel like I just want to keep getting better. It's my goal. But I'm working on a novel right now, which was my thesis at West Virginia Wesleyan, and I was lucky enough to have wonderful advisors help me with that. But soon I'll be thrown out of the nest and have to fly on my own. Anyway, it's set in a coal camp again in 1947, and this time there's a lot more racial tension. There's a main character named Gwen who gets pregnant at 16, and she doesn't know if the father is her ex-boyfriend, who is an African-American, or her current boyfriend, who is white. And that's a lot of the tension that's in the novel, and it's about secrets and shame. So it's new.
So where are you in the process of that? Are you just getting started with that second novel? Are you a third of the way through, halfway through? Where are you? Where do you stand on that?
It's technically complete. It's finished, but I have a lot of revising to do. If there's one thing I learned from West Virginia Wesleyan, it's revise, 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 revise. And I didn't even realize how little I revised until I went to that program. I've probably revised that novel 10 times already, and went through the whole thing 10 times, and needs maybe 5 more times, 10 more times.
So you'll have that done next week, right?
Oh yeah, next Thursday at noon.
Great,
it'll be ready.
Excuse me. In our few moments that we have remaining, I wanted to give our audience a chance to hear a passage or an excerpt from Waters Run Wild, and I know you brought the book in, and our viewers have seen copies of the front cover displayed on the screen as we've been talking, but we're going to give you a few moments just to read a passage from your book. You can even set the scene for us, tell us what chapter that's from, or maybe what's going on at the particular moment in the story, and then we'll turn it over to you and let our audience get a chance to hear some of the words.
Okay, this is segment 5. It's page 17. It's really early on, and it's the main character, Jenny, and she's basically contemplating what her mother has taught her, which is don't try to get out of these hills. Basically, you're safer here, and then her big dreams that she has. And in relation to her little sister, Anna Mae, who is about 5 years old. That's where we're at, so we'll read it now. When's the rain gonna quit? Anna Mae lays beside me in my bed asleep. I can't help but watch her, the way her little chest moves up and down just below her angelic face. I'm sure angels must be skinny little children with round, pasty white faces and half-dollar-sized blue eyes, pouty pink lips that say no evil. I've put Anna Mae in the only gown she owns, a small white one with long sleeves and ruffles that hug her bird-like wrists. How I wish I had something to curl her hair with, to turn her dishwater blonde hair into streaming circles of gold. I watch the purple shadows move across her face as she breathes through her tiny nose. She dreams of marvels, maybe chasing rabbits in the hills with Ezra. I hope she ain't dreaming of nothing else. Mama always told me, there ain't nowhere to go for girls like us, Jenny. You gotta love these hills. Love 'em, honey, 'cause if you don't, you'll be the saddest girl that ever was. But what does she mean by girls like us? Ain't we tough as nails, strong as the meanest storm to hit any valley? Can't we scrub, sew, and chop wood till our knuckles peel like oranges and bleed? I've seen my mama's hands slowly twist up like the branch of a rotten tree over the years from all the planting, the packing, the canning, the digging, and the cold mountain air that gets in through the cracks of her walls that she tries to keep out with torn newspapers and blankets. Can't those hands dig through these mountains, build our own road, a road for girls like us? Ain't our skin as thick as a horse's hide, our backs like the steel shovel Daddy has in the barn? What's she mean, girls like us?
Very nice, very nice.
Thank you.
Andrea Fekete is the author of the novel Waters Run Wild and is also an accomplished poet. And Andrea, if people are interested in getting a copy of your novel, how can they get a hold of that?
BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, or SweetGumPress.com, a publisher.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today on Chapters. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Elliot.
And finally, if you have a question, comment, or suggestion about this Chapters program, we would love to hear from you. You can send us an email directly to the show at the address LP4, that's the letter L, the letter P, the number 4, at zoominternet.net. We certainly appreciate all the comments and feedback we've received from you on our show, and we do read them, and we do take your considerations and suggestions into account as we are planning and setting up future programs. So please keep those comments coming, LP4 at zoominternet.net. That is the address if you'd like to get in touch with us here on the show. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.